Joining us today, we have a guest, John Kuhns. He is a private equity investor and investment banker. He's chairman and CEO of Numa Resources in Bougainville, which is an island in the Pacific. He's also the author of the book, They Call Me Ishmael, a novel based on the real story of a rebel leader with big dreams for his island. John, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here.
So, today we want to talk about Bougainville. It's an island that could soon become the world's newest country. So tell us a bit about Bougainville and its fight for independence.
Well, Bougainville got into a fight for independence as a result of the Panguna mine, which, when it operated in Bougainville, owned by Rio Tinto at the time, was the largest copper and gold mine in the world, and it operated from 1972 to 1989. Unfortunately, in the distribution of the profits from the mine, Bougainville was left out. The shareholders received about a third of the profits. Papua New Guinea received close to 62%, and Bougainville got a piddling amount of 4 to 5%, which precipitated a civil war between Bougainville and Papua New Guinea called the Crisis, in which about 10% of Bougainville's population of 200,000 people at the time perished. Not necessarily by bullets, but there was also an embargo of Bougainville enforced by Papua New Guinea, the mother country. So there was no food and no medical supplies or provisions in Bougainville. It was a brutal civil war. And that's essentially what the Civil War was about. And it was brought to an end by the Bougainville Peace Agreement in 2001.
So Bougainville is currently part of Papua New Guinea, right? But
Correct.
It's last November, they had a vote, which was a non-binding referendum, where about 98% of people voted for independence. And that doesn't mean they're going to be independent, right? So what does this mean, and why do they want to be independent?
Right. The Bougainville Peace Agreement, which again ended the crisis in 2001, gave Bougainville special autonomous controls of its islands. It's actually an archipelago group, including its own constitution, its own president, its own legislature, and certain court and legal rights. They did not, however, retain the rights to defense, in other words, armed policemen, or foreign exchange and currency. But the Bougainville Peace Agreement also gave Bougainville, within 20 years, the right to conduct a UN-supervised independence referendum, which took place actually in December of 2019. And that referendum was essentially structured as a single question. Would you like to continue to be part of Papua New Guinea, or would you prefer to be independent? 98% of those registered to vote, which was about 207,000 of Bougainville's 300,000 people, indicated that they wanted to be independent. And yes, you are correct. That independence referendum is not quote unquote binding. In other words, it doesn't obligate Papua New Guinea to just let them go. There has to be a negotiation. And that has been taking place since December of 2019. But ultimately, Bougainville will become the newest nation on earth. They have no desire to remain part of Papua New Guinea.
And Papua New Guinea doesn't have a desire to try to keep Bougainville?
Oh, yeah, no, they do. I mean, and I'll tell you what that comes from. It's all related to the copper and the gold. But back when the crisis erupted, why did it take place? Well, the Panguna mine, was 45% of Papua New Guinea, which was then a fledgling country. It just went independent in 1975 as a former territory of Australia. The Panguna mine was 45% of their GDP. about 18% of their foreign exchange and so forth. So you can imagine when that mine shut down, they had to try and reopen it. However, today, there's 20 similar copper and gold mines in Papua New Guinea, none as large as, one or two as large as the Panguna mine, but they still don't want Bougainville to leave. Why? Because Papua New Guinea is a generally unstable place. It's a pretty fractious environment. There are 800 different dialects and languages spoken there, and it's really an amalgamation of New Britain, New Ireland, the mainland island, New Guinea, and so forth. And they don't want the stability that might be caused by Bougainville leaving.
So are they afraid that if Bougainville leaves, then other places will want to leave, like it'll destabilize? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying actually two things. Yes, Papua New Guinea itself is concerned that if Bougainville leaves, maybe New Britain will leave, which is another island. Okay. The other real concern, though, I think the overarching concern in the region is not necessarily one simply held by Papua New Guinea. Australia and many other nations in the South Pacific area are worried about China coming into a destabilized vacuum-like area and are trying to contain that problem.
Now, I do want to talk mainly about China, but before we do, a lot of people are wondering, because Bougainville sounds like it's kind of a funny name, right? Like how did it get that name?
Right, that is a funny name. Okay, two men discovered Bougainville exactly 200 years apart. The first was a Spanish explorer, Alvaro Mendana, and he discovered the island in 1568. He's also the man who discovered the Solomon Islands, and he named them the Solomon Islands because he was convinced that they held untold treasures. He neglected to map Bougainville as part of his discovery. The rumor is, or the supposition is, he wanted to keep it for himself. But he then died of tropical disease 5 years later. So Bougainville was left undiscovered and uncharted until another explorer, Count Louis de Bougainville of France, bumped into the island, which shouldn't have been there because there was just an expansive ocean in most of the charts, 200 years later in 1768. So he, of course, named it for himself, and both men thought they discovered the island when in fact it had been inhabited for 30,000 years already.
So, okay, so that makes sense, because Bougainville does sound like a place that Australia would send its rednecks.
Yeah, well,
I was wondering if you actually get that joke. Maybe like 5 of our viewers will actually understand that reference.
Listen, I get the joke, and Bougainvillians would too. Australia may not have sent just rednecks, but they sent thousands of miners over to build and then operate the Panguna mine. And so there was certainly friction between the Bougainvillians and these visitors. But the biggest concern was the Papua New Guineans, who were also brought over to work in the mine. Those people in Bougainville are called redskins. Why? Because Bougainvillians are the darkest people you've ever seen. They are really, really black. And by contrast, people from Papua New Guinea who have a more chocolatey complexion seem lighter. So in Bougainville, it's not exactly a negative term, but they're called redskins. So the conflict was really basically between those two peoples over the mine.
What is kind of the population of Bougainville like now? Is it, the vast majority of people are Bougainvillians, or is there, immigration from other parts of Papua New Guinea, or is there still an Australian presence?
Bougainville, again, is an archipelago. There are 300,000 people living there. There's two large islands. Bougainville Island has about 250,000 people. Buka Island has about 40,000. There are 10,000 on the atolls. And yes, they are largely Bougainvillean. Bougainville is part of Melanesia, and they view themselves as Melanesians. So they're happy to interact with other Melanesians, and they view them as cultural brothers, if you will. In terms of Australians, look, I live in the second largest town in Bougainville, which is called Arawa, and I'm one of three white people there. So basically, everybody who looks like me left after the crisis ensued, and they have yet to come back.
Okay, so you've lived in Bougainville for the last 5 or 6 years now.
Actually, I'm going on my 8th year. I've averaged
okay.
about 8.5 to 9 months a year in Bougainville over since August of 2015. Man.